Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I know it was a little bit of a trek in the rain, so I appreciate everyone's presence here tonight, and I'm very excited to talk to you about Ellen Graham Unscripted. So let's get started. So meet Ellen Graham. She has been a practicing photographer for over 6 decades, and she's currently based in Manhattan, but was in California for many years, kind of back and forth between Beverly Hills and New York and also Palm Beach. And she has historically been a big supporter of the Norton, and we are thrilled to be able to show some of her work in our exhibition spaces. So really the subject of the exhibition is this idea of the unscripted. And I think it really takes a unique understanding of people in order to be a successful portraitist. And I think that's something that Ellen really brings to the table. I think particularly celebrity culture is kind of notoriously opaque. And as you'll be able to see from some of the examples that I show you, she really kind of makes these inaccessible people a bit more accessible to us. And that's something that, feels kind of like a little privilege, So many of her portraits really show some raw emotions, people kind of at their most relaxed, natural, and authentic. And this idea of the unscripted is also kind of a play on Hollywood and kind of what is unwritten in a script. Those things that you kind of ad-lib and can also reference her kind of unorthodox career as well. She was untrained as a photographer, but did study various arts and cultural subjects throughout her lifetime. But what we see in examples like this are really moments of vulnerability, and as you'll see in other examples, she really carefully composes her photographs, kind of graphic layouts. She plays with this idea of doubling a lot, which I particularly like, as well as kind of unorthodox sittings or locations. And I think it's important to remember that her achievements as a woman photographer come at a time when in this sector it was quite uncommon for a woman to be photographing you. And that's a huge kind of component of her practice. And we'll kind of dig into that as we move through. So this is one of Ellen's very first photographs that she ever took at 17 years old. This is in 1951 on the Lido in Venice, so one of the islands that is adjacent to the island of Venice. And we're looking at Valentina Schley, who was a Russian-American fashion designer. Here she is kind of relaxing under the striped cabana. You really get the sense of this 1950s kind of beach vacation. This is at the Hotel Excelsior. And Ellen lived a very exciting childhood, particularly when she was taking this kind of first series on the beach. She was around the likes of royalty, Winston Churchill. These were the types of people who were frequenting the Hotel Excelsior. And I think this is kind of our first indication of this unscripted kind of vulnerable moment. We see Valentina Schley kind of slightly tugging on the string on her sun hat, kind of caught in a moment of contemplation, gazing off frame in a very kind of Zen-like and meditative pose. Really not so much a pose, really a moment of, as I said, contemplation. And I think an important aspect of this is kind of untethering the portrait from the studio space. And that's something that I'll talk about, kind of Ellen's ability to take the portrait outside of the studio and kind of combine it with the snapshot, which is something that we're all able to practice, actually. So I wanted to talk about Kodak, specifically the Kodak girl. I don't know if anyone knows this, but Kodak was originally marketing its products to women specifically. And they kind of developed this character of the Kodak girl. She's always shown with her camera. She's always outside, kind of on the go, on the move, photographing friends and family. She's in an active stance, which I love. She's kind of, about to take her next step. And in my mind, it really amplifies this idea of independence and, some of the kind of taglines in the advertisements included photograph the people in places that you are interested in. Photograph experiences from your point of view, just as you saw them. So there's this real emphasis on kind of in my mind, the Kodak girl as a modern woman. And I think I'd like to compare that to Ellen Graham. She has a world of interests and experiences that are worthy of being photographed and worthy of being preserved. So here she is, the similarly modern woman. And honestly, she seems to have lived about 100 exciting lives. She, as I mentioned, was born in Manhattan. She was educated at the Dalton School. She actually studied under Rufino Tamayo, who was a Mexican avant-garde painter, which is really interesting. She was also enrolled in courses at Washington University in St. Louis, and later graduated from the Parsons School of Design in New York. In the 1950s, she kind of began her first foray into creative work. And she first worked as an assistant stage manager for a Tony Award-winning Broadway revue, which featured Beatrice Lillie, who is pictured here. She was an actress and comedian. And she later designed sets and costumes for another one of Beatrice Lillie's productions. She eventually moved to California and kind of discovered kind of the atmosphere of Hollywood and the entertainment industry. And she worked briefly for a costume designer for MGM Studios before she turned to painting. So here she is in the 1960s. She visited West Berlin in 1961, which most of us might know. 1961 was a pretty important year in West Berlin. That's when the Berlin Wall was first built. And she kind of, after seeing the wall and kind of studying the faces of the people she encountered, she really became fascinated with photographing faces. And I think this is kind of where her interest in portraiture really took off. She began experimenting with both photography, which she had already been using from the age of 17, and mixing that with painting. And she recalled that I believe she visited maybe the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York and had seen 15th century Russian icon paintings and was really struck by the textural elements and kind of the experience of viewing such kind of distressed but also magnetic, kind of golden Russian icons. And so she began experimenting with paint and methods of distressing. Notably, she used her golf shoes and kind of hit the pieces of distressed wood that were covered in paint and the photographs. And so this was kind of her first experimental work. And she became quite recognized for it, actually. So I love these two articles, "The older looking, the better." Too young to be an old fake. There's something a little bit gendered about that, I think. So this is kind of a running theme throughout Ellen's career. So this was in 1964 that these two articles were published. And she gained kind of this notoriety for this method. She did a bit of still life painting as well, but she ultimately decided that painting was too isolating for her. She says, quote, "I'm gregarious. I can't lock myself in anymore." And so she began her kind of first professional foray into photography. So one of her first editorial assignments was for Men's Bazaar. This was in the 60s, and she was kind of assigned to photograph the 100 most attractive men in the world, which is kind of a fun assignment for your first one. And so this included Hollywood stars. This is Maximilian Schell, who was a Swiss actor, other men of notoriety from art, film, publishing, fashion, etc. But already we see this kind of intimate take, and really a use of natural light that is quite stunning and kind of recalls studio portraiture a little bit, but really an interesting dynamic between light and shadow. And so she kind of continued. That was, her first assignment, and she began taking other editorial assignments for all types of different publications. But I want to kind of point out how much process is important to her work. She works alone, without any assistance, and this, in her eyes, kind of maintains intimacy and builds trust between herself and her sitters. It's a more personal exchange between the photographer and the subject. And honestly, I hesitate to say sitter or subject because most of these people were actually friends of hers, and these were she was a confidant to many of the people that we see in these photographs. What I love about this image of Nadia Gardner, who was a Russian model and actress, is the direct gaze that you can just slightly make out between these kind of wet tendrils of hair that are kind of all over her face. But she's sitting naked in the bath. Her hair's a mess. There's clearly so much trust and respect between these two women. And given the types of connections she had to build with people of this kind of notoriety, her, photo practice was really a 24/7 thing. So she was working quite a bit. This series of photographs of Sharon Tate are some of my most favorites. So there are going to be a couple slides from this particular session from 1968. This was the first time that Ellen photographed Sharon Tate at her home in Beverly Hills. And she writes, quote, "She knew what to do and she didn't have to do anything because she was so beautiful. Nobody could look better." I think it's nice to be able to see the contact sheets. We can see the markings that Ellen made on each of these strips, kind of identifying which photographs she felt were successful, which weren't quite right. Sometimes there are notes about 8 by 10, what scale she wants to print them at. It really, I think, helps the viewer kind of understand the overarching narrative of the session, kind of the dynamic and energy, the pace, and also being able to see those pictures that don't make the final cut, I think is really, can be really revelatory to tell a broader story. And as I said, I just love the personal annotations. A few color slides, just a fun detail. I don't know how many people are using color slides anymore. And then some final prints of Sharon Tate. She's very natural. As Ellen said, she had to do nothing. I mean, she's just stunning. Her hair is kind of scattered imperfectly, but also perfectly. Her profile, her piercing gaze, she's really at ease. And here, the photograph on the left is in the exhibition. You'll be able to see that one up close. But we see this kind of organic nature of their exchange. I love also the detail of her foot in the photograph on the left. This just really kind of, it's a small detail, but it's one that kind of brings that sense of rawness and improvisation and just kind of being yourself to life. This is kind of another example of one of those real-time moments, and I wish I knew the complete story of how this photograph was taken, but this is Rosemary Stack and a stranger, I guess, in Del Mar, California. Clearly something's gone wrong with their car, and they're trying to get some attention. Rosemary Stack was an American model and an actress, and even in the midst of trouble is stunning. Oops. And so here is a nice example of how Ellen's work translated into editorial work. So most of her photographs became part of her editorial assignments. I think it mostly worked in the way that Ellen took photographs and then submitted them to magazines, or she was identified as a photographer the magazine wanted to work with, and they would send her out on assignments. But we see that very image right here in this story. It's nice to see them in context, how people would have experienced them, in the time period that they were produced. Here's another example. This is a cover shoot that she did of Marissa Berenson. She was one of Halston's muses, a model. And then the spread inside showing Graham's work. I think with female sitters, especially, Graham was really able to achieve a new level of kind of closeness. And this intimate moment between Natalie Wood and her daughter and Ellen is, it's such a private moment. She's nursing, she's really at her most vulnerable, and yet she just looks so relaxed and so at ease. And there's a real sense of comfort. Same with this more playful moment between Cloris Leachman and her daughter, playing in this huge bubble bath, just dynamic, really authentic. So Ellen kind of experimented in other types of work as well, and kind of turned some of her editorial work into book projects, or intended to. And this is one example of that. So this is The Growling Gourmet. This was her 1976 book that featured celebrities and their dogs, and specifically homemade pet food. So if you are able to get a copy of this book, you see portraits like this one, Janet Leigh and her dog, and then next to it is some sort of recipe that Janet Leigh kind of imagined for her dog, that she cooks her dog or has someone else cook for her dog. So it's really quite cheeky. I decided to put these two together as an example of this kind of mirroring and doubling that she seems to do in quite a few of her photographs. It's kind of a compositional device that she tends to gravitate towards. On the left, we see Veruschka, who was a German model. On the right, we see the Viscountess Jacqueline de Riebe. De Riebe is standing in front of her own fashion designs, which were on display in the windows of Saks Fifth Avenue in Beverly Hills. And then we see Veruschka kind of laying on a chaise and holding this kind of bizarre needlepoint of her face. So it's kind of approaching the uncanny valley, if anyone knows anything about that. And then another one of my favorites that's in the exhibition is of Ellen's son, Alexis, standing kind of at the base of this enormous Giacometti sculpture, Grande Femme 2. And it's really kind of, I think, most successful because it provides this juxtaposition between scale but also kind of this vision of a child looking up at this monumental work of art. And it's kind of a moment of discovery and awe that I think is quite special. Another thing that Ellen does throughout her practice that I quite like is plays with perspective and architecture. And in this example, we see how the building's lines and the seams between each kind of building stone is kind of interacting with the two figures that are in the composition. This is Leslie Caron, who I believe was an actress. We see this kind of suggestion of a police officer about to take a step from beyond the building. And I love this kind of moment of tension, this hint of action. She also was quite known for taking photographs at stage productions or concerts. So you'll see in the exhibition an amazing suite of 3 color photographs, which is less common for Ellen, showing David Bowie performing in Los Angeles. But here we have Sammy Davis Jr., really, belting it on stage, and David Elder, who was a performer, a Broadway performer, here kind of getting himself ready, applying eyeliner, and this kind of psychological study of him getting into character before he takes the stage. So I'm kind of turning towards one of the focal points of the exhibition, and you'll see in the next slide what that is, but I love this spread in particular given the headline, "The Girl Who Takes the Most Sensitive Pics" of Paul Glaser. I think it's a good segue into touching on some of the challenges and obstacles that Ellen faced throughout her career in an undoubtedly male-dominated industry. And she's very openly discussed this. She called them hairy experiences in one article. And we'll see kind of how that plays out in a book project that she proposed. So this is just a kind of screen grab from the exhibition catalog that I produced for the Norton. And we see this quote: "People couldn't believe that they were having a woman photograph them. They always said that this was the first time that they were photographed by a woman." So that's pretty remarkable, given these celebrities who were being photographed all the time by all kinds of people. She faced inappropriate advances, subjects kind of diminishing her expertise and her role, reducing it to what they assumed or hoped would be some sort of sexual exchange. One actor disappeared mid-shoot and kind of showed back up naked with this kind of huge necktie covering his parts, and kind of pranced around and taunted her. And when she said she was going to publish the photo, he threatened to sue her. So it's, it was always kind of unknown territory for Ellen, kind of going into these situations where she maybe didn't know the sitters as well as others. In several articles that she describes her practice, she also kind of seems to compensate or really overcompensate for this kind of 24-hour-a-day calling. This is her career, and she was focusing on it quite a bit throughout the 60s through really the 90s. She laments that her formal education didn't prepare her on how to prepare dinner and have a professional career. There's a lot of self-consciousness in the language in some of these articles, but really by choosing this career, Ellen really eschewed many of the kind of normative gender expectations of the period. And I think in some ways that brings us back to the Kodak girl and the vision of a modern woman. We have to remember the height of her career was also the height of the women's rights movement and second wave feminism and kind of the evolution of the feminist avant-garde in kind of wider artistic practice. So it was a quite important time. But, regardless, she was not deterred, given all of these experiences, and she enjoyed several decades of success and plentiful articles featuring her photographs in Vanity Fair, Vogue, People, Newsweek, Time. And so she decided in the mid-60s that she was going to kind of return to that very first editorial assignment that she took on, the 100 Most Beautiful Men. And she wanted to pursue a book project. She had seen so many books that were outlining and featuring women photographed by men, discussing women's beauty, women's bodies, and she felt that there was kind of this missing component, thinking about what does male beauty look like, and what does male beauty look like beyond kind of physical and corporeal beauty. How might it, what is what is men's psyche? What does that look like right now? So she set out to complete this book called Beautiful Men, and she wrote that, quote, "It would be an extraordinary international black and white photographic essay of exciting men, their looks and thoughts, their feelings and relationships with others and themselves." So this is a list of proposed subjects. So she kind of got around to starting to photograph in the early 80s. And you can see many names that you recognize. And then in the exhibition space, this is kind of the wall of beautiful men that I've designed. And so you get to see them in all of their glory in one place. So these are some examples of those photographs that she was taking in the early 80s for this book. She wanted this book to be much more than pinup, portraits. She wanted them to really be more psychological. I love this photograph of Viggo Mortensen. She writes about him, "He was totally unknown, and I had no idea that he was such a talented actor. He was very charming, very sweet, and kind of shy. He did all kinds of acrobatics to please me in getting a good picture, and although I shot that, in the end it came down to this, just standing." And I think that's really kind of a metaphor for her larger body of work. The picture on the left of Helmut Berger, really in some sort of turmoil, surrounded by a mess of clothing and shoes and just like completely overwhelming sense that we get from this photograph. This is a portrait of Omar Sharif. She was interested in these complexities of the male psyche. And I think, in her time, this was kind of her attempt at flipping the paradigm. Rather than a male photographer looking at women, what does it mean for a woman photographer to be looking at men, kind of reversing the gaze? This one is such an amazing moment. He's got his cigarette just like about to fall out of his fingers, the smoke kind of rising up over his face, about to take a sip of coffee. It's so close. The natural light is really kind of impactful too. So what ultimately happened with Beautiful Men? Well, unsurprisingly, it never got published. It was rejected at least 13 times from some of the top publishing houses. She worked with a literary agent. There's a pretty heart-wrenching letter from her agent that's just like, saying, "I give up." It's like, we can't move this at all. Some of the reactions, these are two of the rejection letters. She's been so kind to kind of open up and be vulnerable and reveal the rejections that she faced too, which I think is something that artists, professionals, we rarely talk about our failures, and I think that's really special. So some of the reactions that she had about the book, people said, quote, "It's for a small, hard-to-reach market." Thought that was really interesting. Others have said, "We haven't had much luck with that sort of thing." Another reaction was that our sales reps would shriek. And so, you've been seeing these portraits of men. They're not controversial. They're not, no one shrieked in the audience. So I feel like it's safe to say they're not doing the thing that, whatever this publisher is saying they would. And, Ellen even submitted comps, comparable books that had reached the New York Times bestseller list, for weeks and weeks and weeks on end. These were incredibly successful books, these two in particular, that featured photographs of men. One was a kind of grooming guide, the other was more of a workout guide, and they featured all kinds of celebrity portraits. In the book on the left, interestingly, these photographs are by Bruce Weber. He was not quite well known at the time, but if you know anything about Bruce's work, it's quite sensual. It's really intimate and about the body and kind of erotic. So it seems, that what Ellen kind of was up against is this idea that no one's interested in photographs of men taken by women. And kind of no amount of evidence of the success of the actual pictures really mattered. So there was no market, and it kind of spoke to a larger double standard. But, nevertheless, she persisted throughout her career, and she built a wonderful body of work, published several books. She has had countless editorial assignments. Her work has been acquired by the Library of Congress, and she has also licensed several photographs to Getty Images. She really is an impressive woman. I also would like to point out that, and she would be upset that I told you this, but she's turning 95 this year, and this is her first museum exhibition. So it really is a testament to not giving up, right? I don't know if there are any artists in the audience, but not giving up. The art world is a brutal world, and I think, it's a testament to not letting that go, not letting your dream go. So I wanted to kind of say a couple more things about the actual exhibition. This is a installation view of the show, and I wanted to talk about how design kind of impacted your experience, hopefully, of the exhibition, as well as the publication, which I highly encourage you to go check out in our wonderful museum shop. So here are a few install images. In consultation with the director of exhibitions and installation, we kind of devised this idea of having the exhibition space almost mimic an editorial spread. So you see these kind of blocks of color mimicking, where an image might fit within text as you're kind of flipping through a magazine. But instead of having, some other text there, I decided to put quotations from Ellen herself. I felt it was important to have her voice be a major component of this exhibition. All of the labels that you'll see next to each picture are also quotations by Ellen. So you're really having an opportunity to hear directly from her. You get to hear, the little ins and outs of each session that she had with these larger-than-life figures, and how, it kind of all fits together. We also included several kind of pieces of ephemera, so contact sheets, examples of her work in magazines. There are no color slides, but an example of the type of things that you'll find inside. These are two of the books that she already published. And so in thinking about the exhibition catalog that we wanted to create, I wanted it to be very different from these two books. So the one came out in 2004 and the other in 2011. And they really feature some of her most well-known images. But I wanted to kind of take inspiration from some of her editorial work. Our designer kind of picked up on, she did several shoots for Family Weekly, and our designer kind of picked up on the typeface of Family Weekly and used that as kind of a starting point for the unscripted typeface. We also chose to go with this kind of linen book cloth, this kind of knobby material that I think feels kind of 70s, if you will, and kind of retro, but also it's a really kind of contemporary treatment, title treatment, and there's no image on the front. It really, it feels more personal, I think. And here's just one example of those amazing David Bowie images. So I hope after I answer a couple questions, I hope we can head into the gallery and actually see the exhibition. But thank you so much.
If anyone has a question, please raise your hand so I can come on over. Coming.
Does Ellen have any connection or has ever met Annie Leibovitz?
Good question. I don't know that. That would be interesting to ask her. I think notably they have such very different styles, and I think that's kind of, honestly, I feel people like Ellen kind of paved the way for the Annie Leibovitzes of the world. And Annie's practice is so much kind of more oriented around the studio, and she really has a brand that she brings to the table, which I think Ellen kind of has less of that aesthetic, kind of recognizable aesthetic. And so they're kind of very different figures in that sense.
Sorry, coming?
This exhibit shows her photography from the 60s and the 70s. What was she doing in the 80s and the 90s?
So there are several that are from the 80s in the show as well, and a few from the 90s. But she was really focused on editorial work. So really the context for experiencing Ellen's work prior to this point in 2024 was through magazines.
Oh my goodness. Oh, Tommy. She works.
Thank you very much. You used the phrase uncanny valley,
Yeah.
and can you expound, because I have no idea what you were talking about.
Yeah. So the uncanny valley, I'm blanking on who the theorist is, but it's a Japanese theorist who kind of came up with this discomfort that we sense when we're faced with kind of a human-like figure. This could be a robot that is designed to look fully human. It could be a mannequin. It's the sense of knowing that it's human, but something's not quite right. It gives you the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. So I was kind of referencing that in this sense of doubling and kind of mirroring the figure in other ways.
Thank you, Lauren. What an illuminating presentation. I have a question about Beautiful Men.
Yeah.
I wonder if it was a branding issue, because I noticed that the two editors that wrote her back were both women, I believe that they were both women.
Yeah.
And so I'm, this is like second wave feminism. Like, why do you think? Do you think it was because of the word beautiful, perhaps?
I mean, maybe, but it is curious that most of the rejection letters beyond the two that I showed are from women. And this is kind of a theme that I feel like I run into quite a bit, like women not maybe wanting to help other women in some ways. But, in terms of beautiful, I don't know. I mean, those books that reached the bestsellers list countless times were about, the body, and they were about beauty, but in an even more physical and masculine way. So maybe I think perhaps it was too gendered in the kind of feminine direction. Yeah, beautiful meaning maybe that was too feminine a word to choose. Mm-hmm.
Lauren, I wonder if you might talk about which works of art are being generously donated to the Norton, and to let you know that Alexis is here.
Oh, where is Alexis?
Hiding.
Thank you for coming, Alexis. So I neglected to mention one of the biggest components of the show. There are several gifts from Ellen Graham, from the Ellen and Ian Graham Foundation, that were donated to the Norton. And we have 25 photographs. I would say maybe 10 of them are on view in the show. But yeah, they have been generously gifted to us, and the foundation made an incredible gift, an endowment to photography that really allows us to continue the great work that we're trying to do here. I mean, it allows us to expand the department's holdings and kind of sponsor great programming and keep everyone having a great time when they come back to the Norton.
Thank you. Let's give her one more big round of applause.